Hello and good morning and welcome to the BTEC Music Guidance looking at delivery from September 2020. First thing to do is just run through a few housekeeping things. Just to let everyone know, the session is being recorded and I will make a recording of the session available online in the Pearson Music community page probably early next week. There's a link to that in the slides that are available in the materials section as well. A couple of other things is that there's a chat function available, so if you do have any questions you can pop them in there and use the chat function to communicate between yourself and me or any other delegates in the session as well. So the first thing to do is just make sure that everyone's audio is working as well. So in your icon bar, you should have a raise hand icon. So if you can click on that to raise your hand, just to let me know that you can hear me. And then we can start getting underway as well. I'll just put something in the chat as well. So if you do have any problems with audio during the session, the first thing to do is to try logging out and then logging back in. This will usually fix most of the problems. Other things to try is the browser that you're using, as that can sometimes affect it. Chrome seems to be the most stable browser with it if you're on the browser. So that can help as well. So this session is a kind of generic session looking at all of BTEC Music's music technology suite, just starting to really consider the delivery of the specifications, looking at the various different aspects of the courses as well. So we'll run through different things like, as it shows there, events, management type stuff, performing, composing, sequencing, recording, live sound, and the sort of more theoretical side as well. One thing that I can't cover today or confirm anything about is if there's going to be any changes to do with specifications or requirements. That's something that there are discussions still ongoing between Ofqual and awarding organisations. So hopefully there will be something confirmed soon, but I can't give any detail on any changes that may take place with any of the specifications at the moment. One thing to note though, and I'm not sure if everyone has seen it, is that on the 2nd of July, I believe it was, when Ofqual announced the consultation for GCSE and A-level, they also published a position paper for vocational technical qualifications, and in that it did state that any learner on a vocational program should neither be advantaged or disadvantaged in comparison to a learner who's on a GCSE or A-level program, and acknowledges that quite often the learners are on mixed programs like that as well. So reading into that, it means that they're considering the proposed changes to GCSE and A-level. It would suggest that there will be some changes in terms of vocational qualifications, but what that will look like, I'm not totally sure at this point, and we'll see where that actually ends up. Hopefully, as I said, soon, in the next few weeks. and certainly, before September, so you can start teaching with confidence in terms of what the requirements are. So just very briefly, just running through this. So just the guidance takes into consideration social distancing within the music department. Most of this was actually written before some of the guidance for schools came out, in terms of the distancing that they've said around music. And performing music. So that could be, there might be some slight differences in the guidance now compared to when this was written. And as it also says, it acknowledges that every centre is going to have different resources and approaches to the guidance set out by DfE. And it also acknowledges that people will be at different stages as well, in terms of that, and in terms of the work that's been completed, and where learners were at in terms of their programme as well. Just excuse me for 1 second as I just replying to someone who has a problem with sound. Just bear with me 1 minute. Okay, so if we just move on. Someone just asking you, is there a student guide for any of the courses? I believe there's some material that is online in terms of promotional material that we've got in terms of marketing things. I don't recall what all of it involves off the top of my head at the moment, so I'm not sure if there's a student guide in there. So the first thing that we'd sort of just discuss, which some centres I know use already, and some may be more used to this approach as well, is around about carousel teaching, to spread out and share the sort of use of specialist resources. So that's around splitting the class up, so that it could be possible to some work on the composing production side of things in a session, and work on computer suite, while another group of learners are in a larger space for performing, and then rotating that across weeks or the lesson, and that will allow you to have that distancing in there in terms of the performance stuff, and giving every learner the opportunity to cover the curriculum as well. So that's a general point of a possible way to approach some of the delivery from September as well. But starting to look more into the specifics of each of the aspects. So this part has some suggestions of approaching it, and then obviously it references some specific units or components in different specifications that this could apply to as well. So looking at the events planning side of things and the management and delivery, obviously a lot of this, specifically thinking about BTEC First Unit 2, where you've got a live event, but this goes for any of the units where performing in a gig or something like that could apply as well. So what we have said is rather than a live event, which obviously is probably not possible at this time and may not be for some time, it could be possible for learners to collaborate and organise an online event. So producing an online virtual gig or online festival, etc. So that is a possible way to approach the actual event side rather than thinking about Unit 2, where many centres may already be considering changing to the CD production side of things as well. So that is one way that you could approach that as well. So the planning and development stages of the process could occur in online meetings and using Zoom, Teams, all the various different platforms that are out there that you may well have been using for some delivery during this time as well anyway. It said Zoom webinar platform is a bit more sophisticated than the standard Zoom meetings and allows content to be better presented and managed by the host. It's also has a facility to charge an entrance fee to a Zoom webinar, and clear distinction between the panelists and attendees. So that could be really useful for some of your virtual performances in there as well. Just before moving on, just a couple of questions. Can a student take a role as a videographer for Unit 2? The roles are, well, should be music based, and the videographer role is a little hazy in that. So I would say not really for Unit 2 on the first award. It should be more of a music based role. Someone else, could we do a live event but for staff who will be social distance? That'd be okay for Unit 2, music first. So understand from that, so the event would be for staff to watch who would be social distance, and that would be fine as an audience. And then virtual gigging meetings, we eliminate all practical and it's all done theoretically. Not necessarily, because the practical side of it could be recordings that your class are producing and performing. So they would still need to possibly record some performances, solo pieces, things like that. But obviously it would allow you to put on a show still and showcase your learners' skills and performances, but allow that to be a virtual online thing rather than a live event. Will there be revised authorised assignment briefs to reflect these changes? I don't know if there is a possibility of doing that, and that's something I'll need to discuss with colleagues if we could revise any of the AABs to reflect that. So the other point there is about radio broadcasts and or podcasts could be considered as media for events as well. I know that some centres already, even before restrictions, do things like podcasts, and that's absolutely fine. And there's just an idea about a platform to use there as well, about streaming live content and events, which is Mixcloud there as well. So can we use apps like Acapella and iMove to build group performances for the virtual broadcast? I'm assuming that is where you have lots of people performing at different times and bringing that together in an edited version. Then I think that would be fine as well as using that in the virtual gig or in the broadcast. as a type of performance as well, because it's for things like Unit 2 in the BTEC First Award, it's much more around the organisation and the delivery of the product rather than the performance on it or anything like that as well. So that could, the organisation of putting together that type of performance could give some really good evidence for the learners in producing that event as well. So as it said, and kind of been questioned there about the sort of theoretical side of it, they've fully experienced the areas of planning, budgeting, marketing, and working as a team. As it said, through, you know, that can be done through online stuff like Zoom and Teams, and that those meetings can be recorded and provide useful evidence there. Process for planning and developing an online product, such as recording, can be approached in the same way as a live event, as we've already discussed as well. And it would be much more around the planning and the scheduling of those recordings that students are looking at, and taking on the mixing and mastering to make sure that they're presenting the material appropriately as well. So around that, again, it's making sure that the learners have individual roles and responsibilities when they're organising the events, to make sure that they are contributing and making sure that they're going to produce the evidence for the assessment as well. And just the other thing is the Senior Standards Verifier Spotlight Report, which looks at the evidence capture and focuses on how to evidence group work electronically as well. There's some really useful stuff in there. So just going back to look at a couple of questions as well that come in there. In a way, putting a performance together and doing it virtually is like making a CD. Yep, it's quite similar in terms of that. But streaming to audience at a specific time, no live audience in the room. Include the changeovers and seeing live. Yep. So if they were doing a live streamed event, they would have to consider changeovers and seeing that live in action, yes, which could take a little more planning. So should the performance be marked live or virtually? There can be different qualities reflected in each, particularly around sound quality. So again, in terms of looking at Unit 2 on the first award, you're not particularly assessing the quality of the performance. You're looking at the product that they have produced, and obviously you can look back on recordings that they've made and put into that to look at the quality. You can look at the live event and how that's come across, although obviously internet access and things like that could sort of come into that and the quality that you're receiving. SSV Spotlight Report is just done by the teacher. So the Senior Standards Verifier Report is a report that is put together and written by the Senior Standards Verifier from Pearson. So that is the person that oversees the overall quality and gives the training for all the standards verifiers that go into centre, well, don't go into centres, but look at the work from the centres and apply the national standards. So on the next slide is just a list of units that this could apply to. It ranges across, obviously, BTEC First, BTEC Nationals, and that includes the 2010 spec and the 2018 spec there for the music side of things, rather than music performance course. Just reading a couple of other questions. Largely non-performers, can they use existing material as part of a radio broadcast rather than not being able to perform their own music. So in terms of that, if I'm understanding that question correctly, you can't just play pre-existing pieces of music. There needs to be some engagement with the learners creating some music. So they could create cover versions of a music or sequence parts and things like that, and put together performances in, or virtual performances in that way. But it wouldn't be possible to just take versions, the released versions of tracks and put that together as a radio broadcast. Use BTEC to cover music tech. Can this be done using BTEC Tech Award? Yes, so I will come on to different ways of covering the various different aspects that cover all of the specifications as well. And that covers the Tech Award. Could they use their own composition instead of actual performances? So yeah, using their own compositions and things like that would be absolutely fine as well. So that's not a problem. And someone's just asked me, is it possible to turn off the beeps for people entering and exiting? Unfortunately, I can't do that myself. Toolbar. So I think that might be something that is done individually in there for you. So moving on and looking at performing as well. So just to clarify, first awards for radio broadcast must use cover versions and originals. So it can include cover versions. It can be original pieces for that. It can't be just playing songs that are pre-existing, recorded by released artists. So it should be something that learners have contributed to. So it could be learners producing a cover version of a piece. It could be recorded versions of compositions that learners have produced as well. But it can't just be them playing the latest #1 record, for example. So can they play their own pre-recorded work? Yes, that's absolutely fine because it's work that they have produced themselves. So that's not a problem. So moving on and looking at performing, I know that there has been guidance around ensembles and the distancing needed in a lot of that and around singing. So obviously that needs to be considered where some of this comes in, and this is where I said this was written before a lot of the guidance came out from DFE around this as well. But ensemble work should still be possible in some way. Obviously group sizes may well need to be smaller than you would normally have, and that could obviously depend on the rehearsal spaces that you have available as well. And it can lead to possibly some strange combinations of instruments, and it may end up being that it is just duos and pairs, maybe trios, maybe nothing larger than that in a lot of centres. So as it says, rather than aiming for just full-on cover versions, it could be good to look at the sort of stripped back live lounge-esque versions of and reworkings of material that are out there. There's so many cover versions in that way on YouTube that can be referenced now and looked at. But also it's just looking at and making sure that you have the combination of whatever combination of instruments you have, and considering that when the performances are put together as well. So sorry, just going back to a question there I've seen come in about can they use recordings of students not on the BTEC course. If they have produced the recording, the learners have produced the recordings themselves, then that would be fine. So what about music by other performers in the group? Again, if they're all in the group and in the cohort, that's not a problem because they've all probably contributed to that in some way, and it is the cohort that's kind of producing and collaborating and working with that as well. Issues. A lot of vocalists, can they work with recordings backing tracks created by a core band? So, yep, going on to this sort of next thing now is sort of looking at rehearsal sessions as well, but considering that in solo work and things like that, there will be a lot more use of things like backing tracks and using those sorts of resources, and that would probably not just be for vocalists. It may well be that guitarists, drummers, and what are other instrumentalists there may end up using more backing tracks when they are performing this academic year than would normally be the case. So that's something else that you would want to consider in there as well. But sort of looking at ways to evidence things as well. So about rehearsal sessions and things like that. Obviously, it may not be possible to everyone fit in rehearsal rooms and safely social distance. So there may be a reliance on recordings and video recordings of rehearsals more. And these things could be recorded on devices that you have in the center, or if learners are able to use their own phones and things like that to produce some recordings that then can be uploaded to sort of secure areas, as it says there, private YouTube channels or your VLE, where they can be looked at by other learners for peer review, and you can access those as well. So there's lots of ways that you can approach the performance side of things in terms of producing that evidence and gaining that material that you need for the assessment as well. I'm aware that there's been a few questions coming again, and just want to sort of go through those before they disappear off the screen. So, because of the vocal singing issues, and we have a lot of vocalists, can they work with recordings backing tracks? So I've sort of mentioned that one. And again, students use backing tracks for Unit 3. So in the external assessment for BTEC Nationals Music Performance, it is possible and has always been possible to use some backing tracks in there, but there is obviously the requirement to have 3 live performers as well. Whether that is something that will change this year, as I said, I don't know at this point if there will be a change in that requirement around how many people in the ensemble and what that unit may look like this year. So we'll just have to wait and see with that one. If they organise a live concert, they need to personally perform in a concert, or could the concert feature students from other classes? So if we're talking about Unit 2 on the first, they don't necessarily need to perform in the concert. But obviously, depending on the unit, there might be different requirements around what's required from learners. Okay, I said about students producing the recording themselves doesn't mean teachers should not be involved in the physical recording and producing. So if it's part of the evidence that's being used to assess their work towards the event and things like that, then it should be learner produced work for that as well. With regards to the Tech Award Level 2, there is a lot of emphasis on teamwork and group work as part of professional musical skills they have to look at. How do they work on these skills if they're doing individual performances, backing tracks rather than group? So obviously there's a lot of emphasis around working with others, as that's an important skill in the music industry. And I think if there can be some collaboration in small groups in classes, then that would be a good way to cover it. As we said, you might not have to have the same size of ensembles and things like that that you would normally, and you may have to rethink some of those combinations that you would normally have as well. But looking at the guidance from DFE and what is kind of recommended and said is yes, you know, there can be some ensemble work and working with others for music, but obviously it's thinking about the social distancing and the ventilation in the space and things like that to allow that to happen as well. Are students allowed to sing in school? Yes, in the guidance from the DFE, singing is allowed. I think it said in groups of no more than 15, and also allowing social distancing and ventilation kind of things to happen as well in that. So is there a sample mark line of work for the performance unit? There is sample mark line of work for most units in different specifications. I'm not quite sure which one you're referring to there. If it's unit 3, that's in the BTEC Nationals. I don't think that is at the moment because it's been harder to produce that material. So working as a soloist, how are they evidencing teamwork? So working as a soloist, obviously it's harder. Well, it's very difficult to work and evidence that teamwork because that wouldn't be happening. But if there can be some situations where they're at least working in a pair to allow them to produce that evidence to cover that and allow them to evidence those side of things, then that would be probably the best way to approach that. So will performers completing Unit 5 on the first award be able to perform without an audience? I think that things where there's a requirement around an audience or something like that, I think it's going to be possible to perform without that. It might be that it's a recording that's put on a VLE that can be viewed by others, and therefore it's a virtual audience again. So looking at that, does the music used in virtual gigs have to be captured concurrently, or can music that students have recorded themselves in lockdown be used? That could be things that they produced in lockdown probably be used in that as well. I don't think that would be a problem there with the evidence that would be produced. Combine unit 2 and 5, yes, certainly, and I know a lot of centres do that. Okay, unit 21 means they are teaching a workshop and a project to a group? Can they teach one another within the class instead of teaching other students? I think that might be the best approach for Unit 21. That is obviously a lot more difficult, and it also should be said that it may not be possible to cover all of the criteria with current restrictions as well, and that may be one where it just may not be feasible to cover things like that. Okay. I'm aware of the time and need to cover quite a bit more going through stuff as well. So just again, sort of a general tip there about making sure that rehearsal sessions are planned in advance so that they're able to turn up with the resources ahead, and prepared ahead of the session. Audit a learner's capability to rehearse practice at home would be useful, and because it's recognised that not all learners are going to have the same resources and access to things at home, and may not have that capability of doing that as well. So we've got the link to the guidance there for the full school opening, and things to consider there about the increased risk of infection, environments where you or others are singing, chanting, playing wind or brass instruments, and how to reduce that risk. And I see someone else has pasted that into the chat as well there. So obviously lots of units and components that this would apply to, obviously referencing component 2 of the Tech Award, Unit 5, and various different units throughout the 2010 and 2018 specs there as well. So again, just very quickly going through some of these things that have come in. Yeah, so the session is recorded and will be available online on the Pearson Music Community page. Doing Unit 5 BTEC first. 2 students, 1 is shielding, so cannot have individual lessons. One-to-one lessons. Again, to show progress without the lessons. I don't know if it's possible in terms of the one-to-one stuff to do that virtually. Does not. Okay, you said does not work virtually. Sorry, I missed that bit. In terms of that, it may have to be that things like if they can record videos that can be shared with their teacher in some way, even if it's not a virtual one-to-one lesson, actually having the recording of them doing some practice that could be shared with the one-to-one teacher. You could then give feedback and pass that on in that way. That would be one way to approach it as well. And actually just getting peer reviews and things like that can be very useful. So I would suggest that if they can get recordings of them practicing things and they're happy to share that with people, with you, the instrumental teacher, with their peers, that could be a way of approaching that as well. So, okay, still not clear if teachers are involved with the recording, producing, editing of these online events. So if it is evidence that is being produced for the assessment of learners, then the teacher shouldn't be involved with that. Really most things should be produced by the learners in terms of that. So if it is a performance, they should be taking care of the recording of that part or that recording and editing that to suit their event as well. So most of this stuff is probably produced by the student and the teacher wouldn't be involved with that. Recording styles and techniques. Can we use original songs student analysis, these as examples? Yep, so that's always been allowed as the 30-60 seconds examples. Sorry, I was thinking of the Learning AMA stuff where they're producing the short clips of examples of styles. for the Learning Aim A in the Tech Award, then they can be the pre-existing clips. For the Learning Aim B, where it's the 30 to 60 second examples of the ideas and in response to the music products, that should be student-owned work of material that they're producing. So that couldn't be sort of using pre-existing recordings of that and then student analysis on those examples. But if they're performing a cover version for the performance element, that's fine. And then for the other things, it is much more about creating the work themselves, because it's about applying their knowledge of the styles in response to those products. So for students to do their composition on their own software at home. Yep, so going through things like composing, sequencing, and recording, quite similar guidance around those, because the software is very similar and the access to things is quite similar probably as well. So where at all possible, when teaching composing, best to try and use Sequencer, as it would allow learners to explore their ideas and record them as they go. Obviously allows for faster working if they're working on a carousel as well. And it can allow feedback to be provided, as it can be mixed out to MP3 very easily and shared in that way from those sorts of platforms. It can also mean that learners can move that work around and use it in different places, depending on if you're set up on a school network or learners have access to software at home as well. So again, with BTEC and vocational qualifications particularly, there's no real requirement for a lot of the internal assessment work to be done in the centre. That can be done externally outside of the centre, home and things like that as well. And it comes down to the signing of the authentication statement about, to the best of your knowledge, it's the student's own work, and that's where your professional judgment and knowledge of your own learners comes into it as well. And most of the time, I think you can be fairly confident about what the work each learner would likely produce as well, and you know your learners in terms of the work that they are capable of producing in that way. So this again references things like SoundCloud as a benefit, where it's possible to input comments at specific points and share that feedback in that way. There's a link there to some resources in terms of songwriting as well. Learners working on sound for media might wish to take samples and edit these to create new sounds rather than having to work together to try and record the live sounds while social distancing. That's another possible way of approaching some of those things there as well. Before I move on to just the next part, just going through. Recording and styling. Can we? Is it acceptable for students to do their Unit 4 composition coursework at home? Yes. So covered that. Same question, Unit 7. So yes. For BTEC students are allowed to work in pairs or groups to create their 30, 60 second examples. So in terms of that, each learner would have to produce their own things and be assessed on their own work. So if it's a performance, they can work in a pair to perform a song in a pair or a trio or however large ensemble that you can safely have in your spaces, and they can all be assessed on that. But in terms of producing an original composition, for example, that is something that each individual learner would need to do. So again, going through sequencing, as it says, very closely aligned to composing. And many students, but not all, will be able to work partly at home, as well as in school colleges. So there's lots of free software that is available for this type of work as well, and there's a link there that would take you to some of the free music production software that could be used for sequencing, composing, and recording as well. Obviously, depending on the platforms that you're using in your centre and learners may have at home, it may have to be that you're saving things as MIDI files, or having to bounce audio down to export it and then import it into different programs. And just a note on that, obviously, then students would have to use careful version control to make sure that they're tracking their progress and keeping track of their latest versions, depending on where they're working at the time as well. Other things in terms of the delivery and teaching of the sequencing and things like that, you could use lots of online sessions around the features of DAWs and things like that. So again, there's an example of a kind of tutorial-based thing on YouTube. And another really good resource for that is Sound on Sound magazine, that does have a section and tips on using each of the main DAWs each month as well. And there's some really good things in that. And thinking of the sequencing unit in the 2010 spec about the requirements about showing setup and procedure and things like that, just noting that that can be done in an adjacent space, or learners could show how their home setup works as well. So there's various ways of approaching that assessment, rather than having learners physically set things up as well there. And one approach could also to show an understanding of setup of equipment rather than each learner taking turns. So as I said there, again, just going through some of these questions. So Soundtrap and BandLab have free versions. Yep. So those are options there. Into lockdown, the students are working on Unit 47 at home. Deadline during the lockdown, should they still submit on the deadline date digitally, or should the deadline date be adapted for their return? That's an interesting question. I think it would depend on the situation of lockdown and what guidance comes out at that time. If it requires another extraordinary regulatory framework from Ofqual or not, would be another thing. So I think it depends on the state of lockdown and where we end up with that. But potentially, I would say that it would still be possible for learners to complete that work at home and submit things by the deadline date, but they may not have, but also consider that they may not have access to the resources to be able to complete that, and obviously wouldn't penalise the learners in any way if they couldn't submit by that date. But as I said, I think it depends on the state of lockdown and access to resources and things like that. So I think there's various different options that and ways that may play out. So again, just identifying just some of the various different units there for sequencing as well. And then again, recording is quite similar to sequencing and composing. So, but does take into account thinking about the size of the recording studio, which it could be very difficult to access a recording studio space, even with a small number of learners at one time, to safely socially distance. Also, it's got to take into account the use of the equipment in that space, and cleaning that as well, or leaving it for an appropriate length of time in between uses. But sort of going through this in the early stages of delivery, where learners are taught about Studio and its functions, could be useful to use a series of tutorial videos, where rather than sort of going in and doing a whole class demonstration, so learners could then access those tutorial videos and look at that in their own time as well. Then you could also try the staggered starts to sessions, where you've got a small group coming in at first and having the demonstration, and then another group is arriving, and you're using breakout spaces to go through things as well. And then looking at, once you've got material recorded, it would be possible, obviously, for learners to mix and master the tracks independently in the centre, in other spaces that have software available on it, or at home if they have the equipment available to do that as well. So just a note as well, obviously you mentioned about the equipment and leaving it. Mixing desks are going to be one of the greatest sort of risks in that, because of the amount of buttons, faders, and everything on that. Obviously, digital mixing desks have a greatly reduced number of faders and buttons, or they could be controlled by things like iPads as well. So if your centre has the capability to do that, that is obviously enable them to access those resources in a safer way there as well. Again, just go through some of these questions. School won't allow its use for any year groups. Something about its origins. Is that referring to BandLab, I presume there? Unit 1 May to ensure they be resitting exams in 2021, or are we focusing on the unit still to complete and not doing Unit 1? In terms of resitting Unit 1, that's a decision that you may need to make at some point, if you want to give them the opportunity to sit that there. So yeah, just some other discussions about different programs and platforms that you could use. And video tutorials alone be enough regarding setting up equipment. Timetabling does not allow the time for both. If we ensure the students still demonstrate their understanding of the theory in the evidence files. Yeah, so I think if they can get the learning from tutorial videos to get the understanding of the setup and understand things in that way, if they can then explain that and show their understanding in that way in theory, or refer to a specific setup, that is a way that could be evidenced. Yeah, so this presentation, I said, will be available after. I'll put the recording on the Pearson Music Communities pages along with the slides as well. So there's just a list of possible sort of tutorial videos that could be done for recording. I won't go through all of those now, just conscious of time that we have, and then a list of the units that this could apply to as well. There may be more units. These are just some of the ones that we came up with when looking at this as well. Again, live sound could be quite similar in terms of recording, as tutorial videos could be a way of teaching the theoretical side of it, and allowing that social distance to happen as well. So these could be recorded and questionnaires set for learners to answer questions about the various different aspects. And again, splitting up into smaller groups would be an option as well, which allow you to social distance and allow learners to have that experience of the demonstration and maybe hands-on with some equipment. But again, depending on the space that you have available in your centre and the resources that you have, you may not be able to do that as well. Again, just a list of possible sort of tutorials there around the live sound settings as well. Again, just some suggestions around pair work in setting things up rather than larger groups working on a PA setup. As we say, live events may not be possible, and in this case, it may need to be video rather than a live audience. Evidence of setting up may be have to be done in a separate sort of class activity rather than in an actual event as well. So that's other things that may have to be considered in the setting up of the live sound equipment. And then there's just a reference there to the larger size of the foundation and extended diploma in music in terms of the production route in that. So where they could in some cases work well as working on solo performance, and that could still possibly work with another student in a sound engineer capacity to set up for that performance as well. And then finally, the sort of music theory and listening side of it, and just sort of referencing that throughout all the specifications, there's some sort of requirement to show an understanding of music theory or styles and features and things like that. And there is a huge amount of resources online that could cover a lot of that material there. Looking at where learners need to demonstrate the listening skills and oral skills, that can be done, take place in individually, and possibly you could use practice rooms to record the parts or songs learned in that. So that's an option there. And again, going back to learners using their own phones, if they're happy to do that, to record material and upload that to a protected site in some way, a blog or in your VLE, as an option there. So a list of some of the resources that could be useful for teaching the sort of music theory side as well, and then going through some of those units that could apply to as well. So I know that there's been lots of questions come in throughout the session. I've hopefully answered those as we've gone along as well. I'll just have a quick look through some of these that are coming back. So will the Unit 1 BTEC first exam still be taking place in January? As far as I know, yes. The provisional timetable for the BTEC assessments for next academic year is online now, and off the top of my head, the Unit 1 exam I think is down to be on Thursday the 7th of January. I think it is. So any advice for approaching tech? Just disappeared off my screen. Tech Award Component 3 in September. So I think in terms of the Tech Award Component 3, it depends on how you're approaching that. If they are working as a production sort of response to the brief and learning about that. There's obviously a lot of the individual work can take place there and use the advice and guidance around the sequencing and recording side of things, and the composing that's been in here, which should allow them to safely approach a lot of that learning and work that they would do in preparation for component 3. But that's not to say that them about changes that may possibly happen with any of these units or components as well. If they're working more as a performer, they can respond, well, they need to respond individually to the brief in component 3, but they could work with other musicians to produce their individual response, or they could just work purely individually at that as well. And again, they could produce a backing track to perform alongside as a way of approaching that component 3. So just a few other things there about some tips coming from different people. Yeah, so link to the recording on the community page, which I'll show you there. So the last slide here, there's a few links. So obviously the website, telephone number to contact us on. There's a link to the contact us page, and then the final one is the link to the Pearson Music community, where you'll find the recording and slides of this. That'll probably be early next week when I put that up. So my concern is what allowance will be made so that pupils with no access to the right equipment at home are not disadvantaged further, and indeed what allowances are made for pupils having a potentially completely new package. Again, I think in terms of changes that may happen this year, I think those sorts of things will be taken into account, but what that will look like is another thing. We do also have the established special consideration routes. So if a learner has been impacted in their in any assessments that they are undergoing, then you can apply for special consideration to be applied. And I think in some of these circumstances, if whatever mitigations may happen in other ways, and it's not possible to do some of that work, I think the special consideration route is an option there as well. Someone just asking about, can I go to the theory pages again? So I think that's the page that you're asking for. When will we find out the results for Unit 1? How long after we submit Unit 2 results, first award? So it's once your Unit 2 has been sort of confirmed, there's various different situations. If you're completing Unit 2 in the next academic year, that needs to go through the SV process to be confirmed before you get the Unit 1 result. We are also looking at options of sort of early standards verification on any units that could confirm the external results as well, but I haven't got any further news on that, if that's going to be possible or not. So my year 11s will still have to sit Unit 1 even though they were registered to do it in May during lockdown. Not necessarily. They should be getting a calculated grade for that. It's if you want them to actually sit the exam and get a grade in that way. But if they do that and resit, and they do get a calculated grade, it will be the best result that counts with that as well. So has BTEC First Award in music being put forward to continue after 2022? Yes, so DfE confirmed earlier this year that any qualifications that are included on 2022 performance measures will be rolled over and be included on 2023 performance measures as well. So First Award will be included on 2023 performance measures now as well. Are there any getting started courses going on this? First year I'll be teaching level 3 performance new course. I don't know of any in any diaries particularly at the moment, but I will be looking at putting one on quite soon. I'll be looking at doing that in the next few weeks in terms of getting the links and dates organised. And again, I'll post the link in probably the Facebook groups and the music community pages as well. So just keep an eye out for that. If students retake the Unit 1 exam, does the best grade count or the most recent? It's always the best grade that will count towards the overall qualification grade. So they can resit the Unit 1 and it will be that grade, the best grade that counts out of the attempts that they take. So priorities Unit 2 on First Award for SV, we'll need to assess. Yeah, if you want to get that result as soon as possible for the Unit 1, then you will need to get that Unit 2 one done as early as possible, I think. And as I said, we'll let you know about any possibility of early SV in that. Okay. I know that we've run over time a little bit, but I really hope you found the session useful. And as I said, there'll be a recording available on the music community pages early next week, along with the slides as well. And I hope you all have a good day. Just a couple of questions come in, so I'll cover those as well. Although they're disappearing off my screen. Completed Unit 2 but not SV'd yet. So if your Year 10's completed Unit 2 and you submitted a centre assessment grade for the summer, that will count. So they would get their Unit 1 calculated grade as well. If they're receiving the centre assessment grade for Unit 2, then that you won't have to have Unit 2 go through the SV and you will receive that grade. It's only for centres that would be completing Unit 2 this in academic year 2020-2021, where that would need to be done. Non-performers working with other students for Unit 2, you cannot use the recording equipment. Will editing techniques and logic be enough evidence of their contribution? I think in terms of the current restrictions, what you will be allowed to do and how to do that, as long as they're demonstrating their contribution to the event and working on that and editing material that's going into that, I think that would be okay, yes. Okay. I said thank you very much for attending, and I hope you found that really useful. Component 2 on Tech Award in Year 10 assessing 11 students now. Okay, yeah, someone mentioning about Component 2 of the Tech Award. Yeah, I can't confirm anything particularly now, but it is a situation that we are aware of for not just the Music Tech Award, it's all tech awards in a lot of centres. Because of the structure of the course, it's got 3 components, so naturally one of those components is likely to straddle an academic year, and obviously normally in a normal situation that wouldn't be a problem. It's because of this lockdown that it's created an issue for centres in delivering that and assessing that, and so that is something we're aware of, and those are parts of the discussions that are ongoing as well, and hopefully we can get clarification for you as soon as possible on that. And someone just asking over the phone or video training support for BTEC first. Yeah, if you've got any questions around any of the specifications, please do contact me, phone or via the contact form or anything like that. And you can ask questions that way, or if you just contact me on that and want to arrange a phone call or a video call, I'm happy to do that as well.